Elizabeth Montgomery broke her silence before her death in 1995, and what she revealed will destroy your childhood memories of Bewitched. For 8 seasons, Samantha Stevens became the most beloved witch in television history. But behind the magic and the nose twitching, there were bitter feuds and crushing pressure and secrets that ABC buried for decades. Elizabeth spoke candidly in her final years, and what she admitted is devastating. The real reason she despised playing Samantha after season 4, how the network forced her to stay in a role that made her miserable. The 2 co-stars she refused to speak to for years, why her father tried to destroy her career, and the dark truth about what playing a perfect housewife witch did to her identity as a woman. This is not another nostalgic trip through 1960s sitcoms. These are confessions from Elizabeth Montgomery herself, exposing what it really costs to play America's favorite witch. If you think Bewitched was magical fun, you are about to discover the disturbing truth that Elizabeth took to her grave. Before we dive into video, please subscribe to our channel. Elizabeth Montgomery never wanted to do Bewitched. In 1963, she was a serious dramatic actress who had appeared in prestigious television dramas and films. She was the daughter of Robert Montgomery, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, and she was determined to prove she had talent beyond her famous name. Elizabeth wanted to do Shakespeare and Tennessee Williams. She wanted critical acclaim, not lightweight sitcom fame. But her career was stalling. She was not getting the dramatic roles she wanted, and she needed work. When her agent told her about a new sitcom about a witch married to a mortal, Elizabeth laughed. She thought the premise was ridiculous. A witch who gives up her powers to be a suburban housewife? Elizabeth said it was the most sexist thing she had ever heard. But the money was good, and ABC was offering her a starring role. Elizabeth reluctantly agreed to do the pilot, assuming the show would fail and she could move on. What Elizabeth did not expect was that Bewitched would become a massive hit. The show premiered in 1964 and immediately shot to the top of the ratings. Audiences loved Samantha and her magical mishaps. Elizabeth was suddenly one of the biggest stars on television. She should have been thrilled, but Elizabeth admitted she felt trapped. She had signed a 5-year contract that locked her into playing Samantha, whether she wanted to or not. Elizabeth revealed that she tried to quit after the first season. She told the producers she had made a mistake and wanted out. ABC refused. They threatened to sue her for breach of contract and destroy her career if she walked away. Elizabeth said she felt like a prisoner. She was being forced to play a character she did not respect on a show she thought was beneath her. But she had no choice. She had to smile and twitch her nose and pretend to be happy while inside she was dying. What fans never figured out is that Elizabeth Montgomery hated Samantha Stevens. She thought the character was a betrayal of everything women should be. Samantha had incredible power, but she used it to cook dinner and clean the house. She could have done anything, but she chose to be subservient to a mortal man who constantly told her what to do. Elizabeth said the show's premise made her sick. It sent a message that women should suppress their talents and abilities to make men comfortable. This was the 1960s when the feminist movement was gaining strength, and Elizabeth was watching herself play a character that represented everything feminists were fighting against. Elizabeth revealed that she begged the writers to give Samantha more independence and strength. She wanted Samantha to use her powers for something meaningful, but the producers refused. They said audiences loved Samantha because she was non-threatening. A powerful witch who chose domesticity was comforting. A witch who challenged gender roles would scare people away. The relationship between Elizabeth Montgomery and her father, Robert Montgomery, was one of the most painful aspects of her life. Robert was a conservative Republican who believed in traditional values and traditional gender roles. He was furious when Elizabeth took the role in Bewitched. Robert thought sitcoms were trash, and he told Elizabeth she was destroying the family name. Elizabeth said her father's disapproval devastated her. She had spent her whole life trying to earn his respect, and now he was ashamed of her. What made it worse was that Robert had been a big television star himself. He had hosted a prestigious dramatic anthology series in the 1950s. But he saw his work as art and Elizabeth's work as garbage. Robert would not watch Bewitched, and he told people his daughter was wasting her talent. Elizabeth revealed that she and her father barely spoke during the show's run. She would call him, and he would be cold and dismissive. Elizabeth said she felt like she could never make him proud no matter what she did. The pain of her father's rejection pushed Elizabeth deeper into depression and self-doubt. She started drinking heavily to cope with the stress. Elizabeth would drink wine during lunch breaks and vodka after filming Wrapped. She said alcohol was the only thing that numbed the pain of playing a character she hated, while her father told everyone she was a disappointment. Elizabeth's drinking got worse as the show continued. By season 4, she was drinking every day. Her husband, William Asher, who was also the show's producer, knew about the problem, but he did not know how to help her. Elizabeth said she was spiraling, and nobody seemed to care as long as she showed up and played Samantha. One of the most explosive secrets Elizabeth revealed. involves her relationship with Dick York, who played Darren in the first 5 seasons. On-screen, Samantha and Darren were a loving couple. Off-screen, Elizabeth and Dick had a complicated and often tense relationship. Elizabeth said Dick was a sweet man, but he was deeply insecure. Dick had chronic back pain from an old injury, and he was addicted to painkillers. Elizabeth said there were days when Dick could barely function. He would show up to set barely able to stand, and they would have to film around him. Elizabeth tried to be supportive, but Dick's addiction made him unreliable and difficult. There were times when Dick would forget his lines or fall asleep between takes. Elizabeth said she had to carry scenes and cover for his mistakes. The producers knew about Dick's problems, but they did nothing. They kept pushing him to work through the pain because stopping production would cost too much money. The breaking point came in 1969 during the filming of season 5. Dick collapsed on set and had to be rushed to the hospital. The doctor said his body was shutting down from years of painkiller abuse and physical stress. Dick was told he could never return to the show. Elizabeth said she felt terrible for Dick, but she was also relieved. Working with him had become exhausting and painful to watch. ABC replaced Dick with Dick Sargent, and most viewers accepted the change without much complaint. But Elizabeth revealed the transition was awkward and uncomfortable. Dick Sargent was a different kind of actor with a different energy. Elizabeth had to adjust her performance to match his style, and she resented having to do that. Elizabeth also said she felt guilty about how easily Dick York was erased. He had given 5 years to the show and destroyed his health in the process. Then he was replaced and forgotten. Elizabeth said that experience taught her how disposable actors really were. Elizabeth Montgomery also revealed the truth about her marriage to William Asher and how Bewitched destroyed it. William was the show's director and producer, which meant Elizabeth was working with her husband every single day. At first that seemed romantic, but it quickly became suffocating. Elizabeth said she could never escape work. She would go home, and William would want to talk about the next day's shoot or discuss script changes. Elizabeth had no separation between her personal life and her professional life. Everything revolved around Bewitched. Elizabeth said the show consumed their marriage. They stopped being husband and wife and became business partners. The intimacy and romance disappeared. By season 6, Elizabeth and William were barely speaking unless it was about work. They slept in separate rooms and lived separate lives, but they had to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage because they were both so closely tied to the show. Elizabeth revealed that she had an affair during the show's run. She would not name the person, but she said it was someone connected to the production. The affair was brief, but it gave Elizabeth a sense of freedom and escape that she desperately needed. She felt alive for the first time in years, but the guilt ate away at her. Elizabeth knew she was betraying William even though their marriage was already dead. When William found out about the affair, he was devastated. He confronted Elizabeth and demanded she end it. Elizabeth agreed, but the damage was done. William never trusted her again. They divorced in 1973 while the show was still on the air. Elizabeth said filming the final 2 seasons while going through a divorce from the show's producer was one of the most difficult things she ever did. She had to work with her ex-husband every day and pretend everything was fine. One of the most disturbing revelations Elizabeth made was about the pressure to maintain her appearance. The network was obsessed with keeping Elizabeth looking perfect. She was not allowed to gain weight or change her hairstyle or age visibly. Elizabeth said she was weighed regularly, and if she gained even a few pounds, the costume department would complain. Elizabeth developed an eating disorder trying to maintain the impossible standard. She would skip meals and over-exercise and take diet pills. Elizabeth said she became obsessed with her appearance in unhealthy ways. She would stare at herself in the mirror looking for flaws. She felt like her value as a person was tied entirely to how she looked. Elizabeth also revealed that ABC pressured her to get cosmetic procedures as she aged. Network executives suggested she get a facelift or Botox to maintain Samantha's youthful appearance. Elizabeth refused, but the pressure never stopped. Elizabeth Montgomery also revealed how Bewitched limited her career and typecast her for life. During the show's run, Elizabeth tried to do other projects. She wanted to appear in serious dramas or theater productions, but nobody would cast her. Directors told her she was too associated with Samantha. Audiences would not accept her as anything other than the witch who twitched her nose. Elizabeth said that rejection was crushing. She was a trained actress with range and depth, but she was reduced to one character. Elizabeth revealed that she turned down several prestigious roles during Bewitched because the producers would not give her time off. She watched other actresses win awards and critical acclaim while she was stuck playing Samantha. Elizabeth said she felt like she was watching her career die while she was powerless to stop it. The relationship between Elizabeth Montgomery and Agnes Moorehead, who played Endora, was also far more complicated than fans realized. On screen, Endora was Samantha's meddling but loving mother. Off-screen, Agnes was a serious classical actress who thought television was beneath her. Elizabeth said Agnes made it clear she was only doing Bewitched for the money. Agnes would complain constantly about the scripts and the writing and the lack of artistic merit. Elizabeth found Agnes pretentious and exhausting. But she also understood Agnes' frustration because Elizabeth felt the same way. The two women bonded over their shared resentment of being trapped in a show they did not respect. But that bond was complicated by jealousy and competition. Agnes won multiple Emmy nominations for playing Endora, while Elizabeth was never nominated. Elizabeth admitted she was jealous of Agnes' recognition. She felt like she was working just as hard but getting no respect. Elizabeth also revealed that Agnes looked down on her. Agnes thought Elizabeth was wasting her potential and had sold out for money and fame. Agnes would make passive-aggressive comments about Elizabeth's choices. Elizabeth said those comments hurt because part of her agreed with Agnes. Elizabeth did feel like she had sold out. She had sacrificed her artistic integrity for a paycheck. When Agnes Moorehead died in 1974, Elizabeth admitted she felt relief mixed with sadness. She had lost a co-star, but she had also lost someone who constantly reminded her of her own failures. One of the most shocking things Elizabeth revealed was how the show handled her pregnancy. Elizabeth got pregnant during season 3, and the producers decided to write it into the show. Samantha would have a baby, and it would create new storylines. But Elizabeth said the experience was dehumanizing. The network controlled every aspect of her pregnancy. They dictated what she could wear, and how she could move, and when she could take time off. Elizabeth gave birth to her son, and was back on set 3 weeks later. She was exhausted and still recovering, but the network did not care. They needed her to film, and her health was secondary. Elizabeth said she felt like a machine. Her body was just another prop the show used for ratings. Elizabeth Montgomery also revealed the financial reality of Bewitched and how she was exploited. Elizabeth was the star, but she did not own any part of the show. She received a salary but no profit participation. Bewitched made hundreds of millions of dollars in syndication. But Elizabeth received almost nothing beyond her original pay. She tried to renegotiate her contract, but ABC refused. They told her she was already well compensated. Elizabeth said watching the network get rich off her work while she received no additional compensation felt like theft. She had given 8 years of her life, and they profited for decades while she got nothing. In the 1970s, after Bewitched ended, Elizabeth tried desperately to rebuild her career and escape Samantha's shadow. She took roles in dark television movies where she played abuse victims and murderers. Elizabeth wanted to prove she had range and could do serious work. Some of those performances were critically acclaimed, but they did not change public perception. People still saw her as Samantha. Elizabeth said she would go to auditions, and directors would ask her to twitch her nose as a joke. She found it humiliating. Elizabeth revealed she turned down multiple offers to revive Bewitched or do reunion specials. The network offered her enormous amounts of money, but Elizabeth refused. She said she would rather be poor than play Samantha Stevens ever again. Elizabeth also became politically active in her later years, partially as a reaction against what Bewitched represented. She became a vocal feminist and advocate for women's rights. Elizabeth spoke openly about how the show had promoted regressive gender roles, and she regretted being part of that message. She said if she could go back, she would demand better writing and more progressive storylines. But she also acknowledged that in the 1960s that kind of show would never have been made. Bewitched succeeded because it was comforting and non-threatening. Elizabeth said she understood why audiences loved it, but she wished they could see how damaging those messages were. In her final years before her death from cancer in 1995, Elizabeth Montgomery reflected on her complicated legacy. She acknowledged that Bewitched brought joy to millions of people and remained beloved decades after it ended. She understood that for many viewers, Samantha represented magic and possibility. But Elizabeth also wanted people to know the cost of creating that character. She had sacrificed her artistic ambitions and her mental health and her sense of self to play a witch who gave up her power for a man. Elizabeth said her biggest regret was not being braver. She should have fought harder for better material. She should have walked away, even if it meant being sued. She should have valued herself more than she valued success. What Elizabeth wanted people to understand is that Samantha Stevens was not empowering. The character was a fantasy designed to make patriarchy seem magical. A powerful woman who chose to be powerless was not progressive. It was propaganda dressed up as entertainment. Elizabeth said she was ashamed of being part of that, even though she understood the context of the time. She wished she had used her platform to push for change instead of accepting the status quo. Elizabeth Montgomery died at age 62, having never fully escaped the shadow of Bewitched. Her obituaries all mentioned Samantha first and her other work second. Elizabeth had feared that would happen, and she was right. What fans never figured out is that Elizabeth Montgomery spent 30 years running from a character she played for 8. Samantha Stevens defined her career but destroyed her artistic credibility. Behind the magic and the sitcom charm was a woman who felt trapped and diminished by her own success. That is the real story of Bewitched. It brought laughter to millions, but it cost Elizabeth Montgomery nearly everything that mattered to her as an artist and a woman. And that truth is something the nose twitch could never make disappear.